Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Odd Vlog. And today we're going to be looking at some theories and some possibilities about things that are going to be happening in Marvel's Phase 4 of the MCU. Not strictly speaking called Phase 4, and I think the idea is that they're now going to move away from kind of having phases of films, but it's going to be basically a post-Avengers 4 kind of phase. So we're going to call it Phase 4, and we're just going to look at a few ideas and a few things, maybe a few predictions for Infinity War Part 2, because at the moment there's no title for that film, so that's what we're going to call it. And quite a lot of interesting theories that we've heard, and we're going to be looking back at some of the films. Behind me is Ragnarok, which has been playing. Ragnarok and Infinity War, I think, set up quite a few things going forward, as does Ant-Man and the Wasp, if you've not seen that yet as well. So there will be spoilers. If you've not seen any of these films before, I am going to talk quite openly about what happens in them, and just bear that in mind. If you've not seen those films first, you may want to go and watch them before you see this video. So I'm going to start with the three lead characters, if you want to call them that, of Avengers 4, being Captain America, Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Thor as well. Looking at Captain America first, there's been quite a few theories about what's going to happen to him, and the prevailing theory is that both Iron Man, Captain America, and possibly Thor as well don't survive Avengers 4, and that will be the end, mainly because the actors' contracts run out at the end of that film. So that for them is, at the moment, going to be the last thing that they do as those characters. But having said that, I still think there's some possibilities that actually they don't die. Things just certainly happen to those characters that put them in a position where they're perhaps not available for any more future films going forward. But it doesn't mean that they're dead. Having said that, I think Iron Man will die. I think Tony Stark will definitely meet his doom, if you like, in Avengers 4. A lot of people want this to happen. A lot of people are hoping that it does, because it adds a lot of gravity and it brings an end to really what has been the first 10 years of Marvel has kind of been led by Iron Man. And perhaps it's time now to move on from him and focus on other characters rather than him just appearing all the time in things like Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, where he effectively does kind of secondary parts or cameos, even in the case of Spider-Man. So I feel like they've kind of got the most out of that character that they possibly can. So I do think that his demise is probably quite likely. I had wondered after watching Infinity War whether or not he is actually going to survive the wound that he received from Thanos. At the moment where it happens and he gets stabbed, you kind of thought, oh, actually, is this the moment where he dies? And then he doesn't. He manages to use his nanotech to effectively heal himself. But what if he hasn't? What if he actually hasn't healed himself? What if actually he's mortally wounded and we just don't realise it yet? Could it be that eventually it's that scene from Infinity War is what catches up with Tony Stark and actually causes him to die effectively? We don't know. We simply don't know. But certainly, if I'm going to make a prediction, if anyone's going to die, I think it's Tony Stark. So what about Captain America? Well, the theory that I've heard and that I really, really like, and I discussed this on a recent podcast that we did yesterday, that I filmed with, or recorded with, Imagineer Nick, is the idea that actually Captain America doesn't die in Avengers 4, which I like, because if Tony Stark does die, I think if you have Captain America die as well, it sort of splits you emotionally between the two, and I think it takes away some of the impact of just one of them dying. So if Tony Stark is going to die, well, what happens to Captain America? If Chris Evans' contract has come to an end and there's not going to be any more Captain America in the MCU, how do you bring him to a close without actually finishing him off and killing him? Well, my favourite theory for this is we're pretty certain that Avengers 4 is going to have an element of time travel to it. We've got the Time Stone, obviously, and looking at some of the set photos that we've seen, it does look as though they go back to the moment in 2012, I think it was, where we had Avengers Assemble and the Battle of New York. I think we go back to that moment in some form or another, I'm not really sure. But if that does happen and time travel becomes possible, the idea I like is that Captain America, Steve Rogers, uses time travel or the Time Stone to actually go back to 1945, go back to the Stork Club and actually have his date with Peggy, and then effectively just has a happy ending. That means that probably over time he just perhaps dies of old age, and by the time we now get to this point in the timeline, the modern day timeline, he's just died of old age, but he did so happily with Peggy, and that actually he gets that happy ending that he wants so badly. Also ties in a little bit with the scene that we saw in Age of Ultron, where he actually kind of does go back to the club and Peggy is there. So if we're looking at those scenes and we're sort of thinking, actually, are they a prelude to what's going to happen? Because we did kind of see that happen in Ragnarok. Are we going to get that? Are we going to get that moment for Steve Rogers where actually it is a happy ending, but it does bring his character to a close? I really like that. I really want that to happen. It's a fan theory, so I doubt very much that will happen. But God, I wish it would. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. The other theory that I've heard, which is quite interesting, is the fact that, or the idea that Captain America actually did die in Infinity War. If you look at the comics, there's a very kind of well-known scene where Captain America stands up to Thanos and then Thanos basically kills him with one punch. And you did get that scene in Infinity War where Captain America is trying to pull off or push the gauntlet way, not really sure, and then Thanos lands the punch and, well, presumably he doesn't die because he then carries on through the film. But what some people have picked up on is the fact that actually after he does that punch, Thanos then uses the Time Stone. He uses it to go back just a few moments in time to rip out the Soul Stone away from Vision. So in going back in time, is that the reason why Captain America is still running around by the end of the film? Is actually because they've travelled back before the moment where he actually gets killed. And the same thing could be said for a few other characters where, say, for example, War Machine gets crumpled up inside his suit. We know that Black Widow gets trapped underneath a load of kind of wood and trees, and the Hulkbuster containing Bruce Banner gets stuck in the side of a mountain, stuck inside some rocks. But after that kind of scene with Thanos with the Time Stone, all of those events didn't happen. So could it actually be that Captain America did die at that moment in the film, and that somehow in altering the timeline and using the Time Stone and travelling back through time during the course of Avengers 4, they end up back at that moment. This time they beat Thanos, but it's after the punch, and actually Captain America died as a result of that fight. Again, a very interesting idea, and one that I think is very good, because that's really going to play on your emotions from what you saw in Infinity War and probably not what you were expecting to see. So there's two ideas there for Captain America that I think will, if they use either of those, I thought would be very, very good. Probably a little bit more dramatic than Tony Stark just dying, and how Tony Stark would die, I don't know. Again, it could be that he's actually already mortally wounded. We simply don't know. So what of Thor? Obviously behind me you can see that Ragnarok is playing, and there's something that happens in Ragnarok that I think is actually very, very important. It's a really tiny bit of detail, but if you're a fan of the comics you'll probably recognise it. And that is the fact that Doctor Strange takes a strand of Thor's hair. Something that most people just would have overlooked. It didn't really matter. And if you look back at it, you kind of wonder, well, why did they bother to do that? Because they never really expand on it. Well, actually, in the comics, that is what happens, although I think it's Tony Stark that takes a strand of hair. But what happens in the comics is that Thor dies, and that strand of hair is used to make effectively a clone of Thor. A really interesting idea, but one of the ideas of Ragnarok in the comics, Ragnarok is actually the name given to the clone of Thor. And Ragnarok as a character isn't necessarily a good person, a little bit of an antagonist, kind of like the Winter Soldier in a way, in that not necessarily a true bad guy, but similarly not a good guy at the same time. Or perhaps, if you're a fan of the Netflix shows, a little bit like the Punisher was an antagonist in Daredevil Season 2. Not a bad guy, somebody that you root for, but ultimately conflicts with other heroes, and certainly would be an interesting way to go. I like it, and we know that Chris Hemsworth is up for doing a fourth Thor film, and that would be an interesting way to go, because it adds something different, something that they've not done before, rather than just repeating previous storylines in previous Thor movies. So an interesting way for that to develop. Obviously, what it doesn't tell us is the idea as to how Thor might die in Avengers 4, but if he does, I don't necessarily think that's the end of Chris Hemsworth appearing in the MCU. And if we're looking beyond what happens following Avengers 4 and into Phase 4, it certainly could be that him as an actor is still around, but technically his character has had a slight change. So I think that would be really interesting, and I'd actually quite like to see that happen, because it's something that those who are familiar with the comic books will be able to really recognise and pick up on. And I think that's one of the things that makes the MCU so good, is that it really focuses on the source material and uses those comics. So those are kind of the three main original Avengers and what I think will happen to them. One thing I will touch on briefly is these guys, Guardians of the Galaxy, and what actually is going to happen to them going forward, because their trilogy, if you like, their third film, was supposed to kick off the next phase of Marvel movies after Avengers 4. The script is done, but as we know by now, James Gunn is not going to be rehired as the director, and at the moment, effectively, that film is shelved. It's on hold, it's probably not going to happen. I don't think it will happen. I think they're going to leave it, and I don't really blame them, because yes, although the script is ready, I think it's got too many issues with finding a new director, getting the cast on board, and trying to make a film that stands up to the original two. I just don't think they'll bother. At the moment, at the time of filming this, there are reshoots that are happening for Avengers 4, and a lot of fans are speculating as to whether or not that actually is going to involve them killing off the Guardians, and that actually they don't survive Avengers 4. They don't survive being turned to ash by the click of Thanos at the end of the film, which is an interesting theory, because one of the ideas I had is that actually everybody that dies at the end of the film, half the galaxy or whatever, half the universe, are they dead, or are they just actually perhaps alive in the Soul Stone? Are they actually trapped inside the stone? We know that you can go inside it, because I'm pretty sure that's what Thanos does at the end of the movie, where we see him walking through what originally was supposed to be a pool of his victim's blood. He walks into like a stage in the middle, and that's where the young version of Gamora is there and talks to him. That's supposed to be happening within the Soul Stone. He's actually gone inside it. So it's not impossible that those people that have died, half the universe, is just trapped somewhere inside there. I don't know. It's an interesting theory. It would take away some of the weight of those deaths, obviously, if everybody comes back. So it may well be that perhaps the Guardians don't. And it would be interesting to see whether or not characters like Gamora come back from that. Purely because of the way that she died, would she also be trapped in the Soul Stone, and the potential for her to come back? If we're looking at death, obviously the first kind of major death that you get in Infinity War is Loki. And there's been a lot of speculation as to whether or not he's actually dead, or whether it was some copy of him that was strangled by Thanos. One of the things I find interesting is that actually he doesn't turn blue, which I'm pretty sure is supposed to happen because of his background and origin, that when he dies he goes back to his original blue ice giant, kind of frost giant state, if you like. So it does sort of suggest that actually somewhere maybe Loki isn't dead. How that would work, I'm really not sure. And it's interesting because, again, you don't want to take away the weight of what's happened in these characters dying, which, if everybody survives, is a little bit of a concern for me. So those characters that have died, some of them certainly I would rather actually did stay dead. It's not that I don't like Loki. I love Loki as a character, and I'd be happy for him to appear in other films. It's just that with him dying and not coming back, it carries more weight. So we'll see what happens with that. At a similar time, at the beginning of Infinity War, or sort of partway in, we also find out about the fall of Xandar. Probably one of very few complaints that I have about Infinity War is that we don't actually see that happen. And I did wonder whether the fall of Xandar might actually work as an origin story for Nova, who's a character that we've yet to actually see in the MCU. And potentially, if we're looking into Phase 4 and what films they might be doing, as yet there's a load of films that haven't been announced, could it be that we will now finally see Nova, and actually his origin story is going to be born out of Thanos destroying Xandar and basically laying waste to that planet and all of those people? It's an interesting theory, but I would like to see that, because I would like to see what actually the MCU can do with a character like Nova, and how they can make it work. And we know that the MCU and Marvel Studios want to go into a more kind of cosmic space realm, if you like, and move away from Earthbound heroes. Well, that, I think, is a perfect setup, and leads very nicely from Infinity War into the next phase of films. A couple of other things that we picked up on from Infinity War is whether or not Pepper is alive. The last thing she says in that film is, "I'm going to," and we're not sure whether or not she means I'm going to ... do something ... go somewhere, whatever, or is it I'm going to, as in I'm going to go there as well. We're not really sure, and there's not been a lot of explanation, I don't think, as to which version of that line is meant to be the correct one. Did she survive the Thanos snap? Who knows? Maybe she actually takes the Iron Man after Tony Stark dies. We'll find out, but an interesting point nonetheless. The other thing that comes out in Infinity War is why the Hulk doesn't come out, and there's a lot of speculation about this. A lot of people wonder if actually Bruce Banner isn't Bruce Banner and that actually it's Loki, and that's how Loki survives. Interesting, but I'm not really sure if I'd want to see that. I think I'd rather explore the idea that Bruce Banner is just having difficulties in managing the Hulk, and that I'd like to see probably more Hulk in a film, perhaps a standalone film of his own. I don't really want him to die yet in Avengers 4, because at the moment he's pretty much a side character, and I'd kind of like them to see Marvel Studios rectify what happened in The Incredible Hulk. His actual standalone movie kind of needs to be, in my mind, replaced, because I think it is the worst film of the Marvel MCU. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. Other possibilities are whether the Collector is dead. There's the scene, obviously, where he is being used pretty much as a prop by Thanos when the Guardians turn up. Is he dead? Is he alive? We don't know. But what escapes from his collection, I think, is the interesting question, because Thanos pretty much lays waste to the Collector's, whatever you want to call it, museum, house, collection, whatever. And there's loads of things that could be in there that actually potentially have escaped from the collection and they're running around, including possible other superheroes. Beta Ray Bill was one that was suggested, because obviously we think we see him in the first Guardians film being stuck in a cage, but there's loads of other characters and potentially heroes that could have been caught up in cages that could now escape. So it's a potential route for new characters to come along in new films in Phase 4. The other person that potentially is now free is Red Skull, somebody that I really hope appears again in another movie. It's difficult because obviously if Captain America is not going to be going forward in Phase 4, however that may happen, can you have the Red Skull without Captain America? I don't know, but I'd like to see more of that character, because I think he's one of the better villains of the MCU. The MCU does have a villain issue in that sometimes they're very disposable, but in terms of Red Skull, I think you've got a character there that you could use more. And now that we know he's alive, I'm led to believe that now that the Soul Stone has been taken and used, it actually frees the Red Skull from his obligation to stay on whatever that planet was that he was on, and can actually now leave. So where does he end up? Well, he's got to end up somewhere. And knowing his character and what he's like, he's not just going to sit around not doing anything. He's going to be proactive. He's going to be looking to probably take over the world. So interesting. I'd certainly like to see that. So yeah, just a few ideas really of what's come out of Infinity War and other films like Ragnarok. Looking at Ant-Man and the Wasp, as I mentioned earlier, there is the mid-credit scene where effectively it ties into Infinity War, and that we know that Hope and Hank and Janet are effectively turned to ash. They're one of the half of the universe, if you like, that gets killed by the Thanos snap. And as that happens, Ant-Man is lost somewhere in the quantum realm. Now, the very last thing that Janet says to him is to watch out for, I'm not sure if it was time loops or whatever it was, but it was something to do with time. And I think this will heavily connect into what happens in Avengers 4 and lead to Ant-Man either finding Iron Man, going back to 2012's Battle in New York. I don't know, but certainly that's the tie-in. And it's a very good tie-in, because I personally would like to see the quantum realm explored more. And everyone's saying, well, the Avengers could go back in time because of the Soul Stone. Well, probably not, because they don't have it. Thanos has got it, and he's probably not going to let it up very, very easily. So this is another way for them to use time, and I think that's how they're going to do it. So Ant-Man actually that film becomes quite important, and you have to see it going forward, even if the film itself probably not that great. Certainly didn't make my top 10 of MCU films. But anyway, we'll save that for another video. I did do a vlog earlier on of my kind of spoiler-free review of Ant-Man, so have a look at that and let me know what you think as to whether or not that was actually a good film in your opinion. I'm a little bit mixed. I enjoyed it, but it's no record breaker, and if it wasn't for that mid-credit scene, it would be very disposable in terms of its tie-in to what happens in Infinity War and the next Avengers movie. So going forward, what are we going to have? Well, we know that there's supposed to be a Black Widow standalone film, and the theories that we're hearing is that it's going to be set in the year 1999/2000, and that actually it's going to be about the Millennium Bug. An interesting theory, and I think in terms of timelines, it puts Black Widow about the age of sort of 16, 17 as a character. So we're probably going to see more of like digital de-aging being used, which is great because actually the MCU does that very, very well. But an interesting theory. I just personally, I want to know what happens in Budapest, so I'm hoping that there'll be that used as a tie in there somewhere, and that we find out why in Avengers Assemble she's talking so much about having red on her ledger. So hopefully they'll expand on that and open that up and turn that into its own sort of standalone film. So there are lots of things that we're hoping to see with that. We also know that the next Spider-Man film is currently being filmed, and actually in the last few days a still has been released of his new stealth suit. The timing of the next Spider-Man film is interesting because loads of people are saying to me that it's not going to be set before not before Infinity War, but after Avengers 4. I don't know. I still think there's the possibility that it's going to be a prequel to Infinity War. I don't know. We don't know anything really about the film, the plot, other than that Mysterio is in there. So we'll wait and we'll obviously find that out. But we know those films have definitely been confirmed to be coming. Yeah, I don't think Guardians 3 is going to happen. I think they'll be looking to do other things instead. Perhaps they'll open up the Adam Warlock storyline that was revealed at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's a possibility, and certainly there are a lot of new characters flying around at the moment that are being suggested, the Eternals being another one. When it comes to the Eternals, I just really hope that we're not going to end up with another kind of Inhumans on our hands, and that actually it's not good enough to make a film that gets turned into a very bad TV show. So yeah, we'll wait and see what they do with that. And it may well be actually that they turn into Eternals into a replacement for Guardians of the Galaxy. We shall see, but another idea, certainly. One thing I'm not going to talk about in this video, because I'm going to save it for a different one, is the tie-in potentially with X-Men and Fantastic Four and all of the other characters that Disney are now going to be acquiring from Fox and effectively now confirmed as being handed over to Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios. Not going to touch on that, but I do think that's going to be something that they're certainly going to look to explore and open up in the future. So we'll wait and see, but I'm going to do that in a different video coming up soon. So there you go. Those are my thoughts and theories and the feedback from what's been happening in Infinity War and some of the films that came around it. And a few ideas as to what I think is going to happen in Avengers 4, as yet untitled, and then going into Phase 4 and what we're going to see. So let me know. Please leave a comment. I'd love to find out what you think, whether or not any of these theories you think might work, or whether we've got any alternatives. I'd love to hear them. So with that being said, we're all done, and I'll see you guys in the next video.